Okay, we're going to talk about the energy that actually moves around in ecosystems. So first off, we really need to talk about what ecology is. Ecology is more or less the study of interactions between organisms, and of course, between organisms and their environment. So how the owl is interacting with the earthworm, how the deer is interacting with the mouse, and of course, how the deer is interacting with like the air and the clouds and all those other things that make up part of the environment. What we need to do here is we need to more or less divide up things into two categories, the biotic and the abiotic. Bio, of course, meaning life, and abiotic meaning without life. All the things that are biotic are things that are living, and things that are abiotic are things that are not alive, but still, of course, affecting the environment. So a biotic factor, as I just mentioned, is a living part of the environment, like trees or grass or bacteria or birds. All those are alive and can impact the environment. Lion, disease, or food, any one of those would be a biotic factor. Abiotic factor, of course, are things that are without life, things that are not alive, like temperature, the light, the moisture, pollution, air, wind, all of those different things there. All of those are going to be considered part of the abiotic factors, a non-living part of the environment that, of course, can have huge and profound impacts. So first off, let's talk about primary producers, also known as autotroph, that means self-nourishing. Only algae, bacteria, and plants can be producers and actually produce the food that is later used by other organisms. And we've got two different categories here. We've got what's called photosynthesis and chemosynthesis. We should be very familiar with photosynthesis. That's, of course, how plants use the energy of the sun to create those high-energy carbohydrates. Chemosynthesis, that occurs in total darkness, no light involved, and you usually really only see this on like the seafloor. So photosynthesis should be familiar, using light to create energy-rich carbohydrates. Plants do that. Nothing new, nothing, out of the ordinary there. But chemosynthesis is something that's relatively new to science. We've only discovered this in about the past 40, 50 years. Here's where we're going to be using chemicals to create energy-rich carbohydrates. So at the very bottom of the ocean floor, we've got these hydrothermal vents that are releasing gases like hydrogen sulfide. That is a form of energy that these organisms, these tube worms filled with these bacteria, they do chemosynthesis and convert that into useful compounds that other things can live off of. So it's just like the base of a new food chain. It's just that the base is not a plant. It's something that uses chemicals to actually do all this. Here you can see like this huge colony of these tube worms. And don't be mistaken by these pictures. These things are like 7, 8 feet long. They are huge. And the basis for food chain, you can see like there's a little crab climbing around on there. They all need these. These are the primary producers of their particular world. Now, let's talk about the consumers. These are all the organisms that cannot make their own food, and they have to get energy from other organisms, whether it's a carnivore, an herbivore, an omnivore, a scavenger, a decomposer, or even a detritivore. Every single one of those is going to be a consumer. Unlike plants doing photosynthesis and those tube worms doing chemosynthesis, they can't make their own food. They gotta steal. They gotta eat something else in order to get that energy. So all these organisms, they eat something that makes food, or they eat something that eats something that makes food, or they eat something that eats something that eats something that eats food. Every single one of them, to one extent or another, is a thief. They're not actually making those energy-rich carbohydrates. They're just stealing the energy from others. So let's talk about a food chain or a food web, how that energy actually moves through the environment. A food chain is a series of steps where organisms transfer energy by eating and being eaten. The carrots transfer their energy to the rabbit, which when it's eaten by the fox transfers its energy there, and then of course it transfers it to a lion. This is a weird ecosystem that goes carrot, rabbit, fox, and lion, but of course the arrows represent energy going from place to place. Here's another food chain where grass is going to grasshoppers, going to frogs, is going to snake, is going to the final consumer here, and then of course everything dies and will decompose, and it's the circle of life and all that stuff there. Here's a food chain, grass to grasshopper to bird to snake to owl, and then of course they're all going to decompose and die eventually. A food web, however, is going to be a little bit different. That's a bunch of food chains all smashed together. A network of complex interactions formed by feeding relationships involving several food chains. So if we look on here, there's a whole bunch of different food chains that I'd actually trace from the primary producers all the way to those apex predators there. Here's another one, corn to grasshopper to frog to python to eagle. You could trace a whole bunch of different food chains there. That's a food web. It's a bunch of food chains put together. Let's talk trophic levels and ecological pyramids. Each step on that food chain is called a trophic level. Here I've got the grass that's at the bottom of this food chain here. And then I've got grasshoppers and then birds and then the hawk there. Each one of these layers is called a trophic level where the nourishment is. Primary producers are always going to be forming the basis of a food chain or web. And by nature, you're always going to have the most of them. They're the base of the pyramid. An ecological pyramid shows the amount of energy or matter available at each trophic level. I'm going to have way more grass than I am mice, and way more mice than I am going to have snakes, and way more snakes than I'm going to have hawks. The further I go up the food chain, the less and less energy and matter there is as a resource. So you're going to see less and less as you go more and more towards the top. Only about 10% of the energy at each trophic level is actually going to be making it to the next one. We call this the 10% rule. The rest is wasted as heat. So here I've got a plant, a primary producer, and let's just say it's got 100,000 calories or something like that. Only 10% of that, like 10,000, is be available for the primary consumers, the herbivores. And then the ones that eat that, well, maybe we're down to about 1,000 calories. And then the ones up there, 100 calories, and then we're looking at like 10 calories there. That's not enough. So these apex predators, they need a very, very, very wide area, almost a territory, in order to actually get the nourishment. Because each step in this food chain, 90% of that is being lost as heat. Animals are just moving, walking around, and that stuff does not make it to the next level. There's nothing to be transferred there. Here we can see another one, the producers at the bottom, and then the primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and quaternary. The further I go up toward the top, the less and less there is. And the reason that it's a pyramid, not just like a cube, is because all this open space, well, that's heat. That was what is lost, and you can't get that back. So at the very top, there's not going to be nearly as many as we saw at the bottom.